Forgiveness. A hungry young lady.
Gracious Father, you can move those mountains. You are big enough to do anything that you want out of our way. But Father, sometimes you want us to just go through that battle so we can just trust you. Father, you are truly right to say you're the only one that has that power to save. Father, Brother David, open up your word. I pray that you will just speak to us as only you can this morning. Father, we ask all these things in your holy name. Amen.
That Cypress art that you picked up today, please take a moment to look at the front cover. I'd appreciate it so much. We want to say thank you to all the people who are going to be serving on committees, who have in the past and continue to do that sort of thing. I would say that when we talk about our topic for today, cascading disruptions, the consequences of sin, the importance of Jesus Christ. This idea of cascading disruptions is churches deal with that. In other words, when things start going wrong, let's say, imagine a congregation that had a situation where maybe half of the people in the congregation nearly suddenly had flooding in their homes. Could you imagine a thing like that? No. Could you imagine that as a result of that, other things happen, like maybe they have a hard time staying in their house, and so they have to find another place to live. Maybe they have to have possessions that are destroyed, and they have to put other ones in storage. And so there's a cascade of disruptions that starts with one. The church can have a situation where, and especially this kind of church, the Cypress Baptist Church, is a congregational model, which means that we believe, based on the book of Acts, that even though there are elders, there are staff members and folks of that sort, the congregation themselves are led of the Lord to make decisions that are godly choices as they seek the mind of Christ to be able to do the things that God would have them do. And so, this thing is making noises. See if we can get it to stop that. So what happens is in a congregational model, the members of the body of Christ here in the local church take a role. They take a role, they use their spiritual giftedness, and we do that in committees. We do that in Sunday school teachers and that sort of thing. And so as committees function, they, in our particular case, as you read the article, you'll see they'll be working with staff members to try to do the very best ministry work and serve Jesus the very best that we can with over $600,000 if we give the budget that we've approved. And so as we do that, it's important for you to pray for these committees, for them to be able to be in attendance in their meetings, for them not to just come and do the status quo. What did we do last year? What did we got to do to get out of this meeting and go and watch the Cowboys? I mean, whatever. The idea is what is it that Jesus wants this committee to accomplish in 2019 to serve Him and to involve the body of Christ at Little Cypress Baptist Church, to be stimulated to love and good deeds, to do ministry, to do mission, to be involved in fellowship, to be involved in worship, to be discipled. And you say, well, how does a hospitality committee do that? Oh, they definitely play a role around here, a big role. Well, you know, what about a kitchen committee? Well, they kind of work together. The kitchen committee, do they matter? How many of you have been in a kitchen somewhere in a church and you open the refrigerator and there were Tupperwares from 50 years just in there? All kinds of science projects growing in there and that sort of thing. We can have cascading disruptions in the body. And so as we thank these people who have served and will, and thank the nominating committee for the work that they do to pray and to seek out these folks, I wanted for you to understand the importance of this. Now, I want to show you a picture. It may look a little familiar. Does that look familiar at all? People coming and bringing water and supplies and materials and that sort of thing, that is a governmental response, very likely military working with FEMA, to try to deal with the cascading disruption. Now, the government, you know, it's so big, it kind of trips over itself sometimes trying to do what it's supposed to do. But I have yet to see a time when we've had them show up with ice and water and food and that sort of thing where people were disappointed. They were glad to see help in a difficult time. If you look at this next chart, you're going to see, for example, a disruption in the electrical supply. And there is a cascading situation. So if you, and I know you can't read all of this, but the boxes across the top say energy, transportation, communication technology, and chemical industry. The ones across the middle say provision, administration, and finance. And so what happens is that the disruption of the electrical supply wrecks the whole system. And as it does, the big arrow there says it has impacts on industry, services, trade, and households. Impacts on industry, service, and trade. But the one on households on the far right at the bottom. Supply shortfall of food, of water, of health care, and on it goes. Dangers that can come from failures in the chemical industry. And I picked that one because we do have chemical industry in our area. And we have had times when they have had to deal with shutdowns. And some of them that lasted a long, long time. Well, all of these kinds of disruptions have layers, and I want to show you just a couple more pictures, and we're going to go to the book of Genesis in a moment. This next one shows how, in this particular case, when you have a failure in electrical power, it affects the oil and gas industry because they need electrical power. Now they're not supplying oil and gas, and so communications, transportation, emergency services, the supply of water, the treatment of sewer, emergency services, the fire department, emergency call centers, hospitals, ambulances, banking, finance, all begins to crumble. And so as you look at what these kinds of disruptions mean, there are types of these interdependent failures, and I want you to have this in mind. Go ahead for the next slide, because we're going to be looking at these in the future. Cascading a direct disruption, we know, hurricane, we could have tornado, we could have, kinds of things in our area. It could be something bigger. We have things that we're told have happened. In the 19th century, there was an electromagnetic pulse that came from the sun. It destroyed the whole telegraph system of the United States, burned the wires off poles, electrocuted telegraph workers that were using the equipment when it hit, and all these sorts of things. Well, that wasn't a problem in the 19th century, but if you had that same occurrence now, you would set the nation back to the 19th century in terms of our ability to function. Then there are things that escalate, that they get worse because one feeds on another. You have restoration attempts, and restoration is what we like to see. This is what we're going to be talking about today in the work of God as He works in our situation, as sin has created a cascading disruption in what was the plan of God for this world and for our lives. Now, compound damage, propagation, I'm not going to talk about that so much, but all that says is that when things start falling apart, it destroys equipment, and then you have disruptions that are substitutive, failed systems, or you're trying to recover from another system to make it work, and it doesn't work. You say, preacher, what's that got to do with anything?